Am I in focus? Yes, I think so. All right, today I want to talk a little bit about the Icelandic mindset, the way we Icelanders perceive life, our mannerisms and behaviors to a degree. Not because I think we are, amazingly unique or anything like that, but I think we are slightly different from the baseline Europeans or Westerners. And whether it's just because you're interested in Icelandic culture and are curious, or if you potentially are going to be visiting here and you want to get a little bit of an insight into how these people think and operate, what operating system they're running on, which differs slightly from most of the Western world, then I hope to provide a little bit of context here. As a baseline, we are a North European society. We are a Nordic country. We are a hyper-informed, modern, and globally participatory culture. So we are constantly bombarded by external influences. But at the same time, centuries and centuries, over 1,000 years of isolation has created something underneath all of that. I think we have a certain closeness with each other, a closeness with nature, which affects how we perceive the rest of the world and how we kind of apply those external influences. And these things, again, they may not be completely unique in the world, but I think they are very distinguishably Icelandic. Now, this is one of the biggest distinctions that I think I can start out with making, is that in Iceland, people most often matter more than systems. And this is a scale thing. I mean, we are a small society. And I think the feeling or the characteristic sometimes is that this was rather than being a big, complex country, this looks more or feels more like a village that ended up running a state. Now, this being said, and I think this is probably the right place to put in a little bit of a disclaimer, obviously, specifically since I'm saying that individuals matter more than systems or large-scale patterns, your mileage does vary. I mean, obviously, Icelanders are individuals like everywhere else, and we're going to differ quite a bit, but we're talking here about some generalization. I'm making some generalizations about the kind of social character of the nation. Now, due to this scale, or the small scale and the size of the country, social circles here tend to overlap. People you know from work, you're going to be connected to potentially through friends as well, or family members, and this creates a social dynamic that's important. We may not have the romanticized honor of the Vikings or these kind of things, which are just historical bullshit. But reputation matters quite a lot. Reputation matters so much that it oftentimes is a lot more important than your specific or technical credentials. Whom you know can be more important than something else, and a reputation once lost can be hard to regain because everybody is connected. And this enforces a kind this enforces behavior within the society where people are conscious of preserving their reputation. This has positive sides. People in positions of power tend to be approachable, tend to be available, tend to be human. So there's that expectation that you can have these conversations with them because, again, bad reputation specifically spreads quite fast. But this obviously has these negative connotations as well, with, again, these informal systems often becoming more important or more emphasized than structure. And sometimes, of course, structure rather than informality is what's needed. And an unfortunate side effect of all this closeness and this emphasis on personal relationships over structures creates nepotism, which I think is probably our biggest local form of corruption here. Iceland is a trust-based, low-formality society. Based on where you're coming from in the world, you might actually be used to the default state of behavior between people being distrust and taking a defensive stance. This is different here. We tend to look positively on other people as a baseline and expect or have trust. We expect people to behave reasonably well. There's a certain level of naivety in it, definitely, but we're not absolutely naive. We don't expect people to be perfect and everybody to be absolutely perfect, but we do expect people generally to behave well enough, and our experience tells us that people generally do so to the degree that you can live life with that comfortable perspective of starting off from a point of trust. And maybe because of this, we are an extremely informal society. Titles or forms of address don't exist. There's one exception, I'll maybe mention it a little bit later. But I mentioned this in previous videos as well, that everybody talks to everybody on a first name basis, and that's not a conscious decision to do, that's just exactly how our culture and language works. You just cannot call me Mr. Gunnarsson. It just doesn't exist. I'm always Ivar. If you need to refer to me in a more of a formal sense, like in documents or these things, you're just going to put in my full name, Ivar Gunnarsson, but never with a Mr. Herra in Icelandic in front. Doesn't exist. It's always just Ivar, regardless of whether I'm just this guy on your screen, if I'm the CEO of a company, if I'm your boss, or if I'm the president of the country. Where the only exception lies, I mean, our president, Halla, is often just referred to in interviews as Halla. This is slightly changing, and there still is this level of formality around that, where you can refer to them as Herra or Fru, Mr. or Mrs. Forseti, president. But that's a formal way of addressing them, and I think it's reserved for the president and the president of parliament, which is a different role. And I think that's they used to say so for the bishop of the church here, but with kind of the lessening role of religion in the church, I think that's disappeared as well. So you're going to do quite well in Iceland if you just refer to any person without any titles or honorifics or these kind of complexities with just their first name. And I think this is well represented in our politics as well. Government feels natural to us when it's participatory. You can see it in our political structures, where we have these coalition governments forming from multiple different parties. So it's different points of perspective coming together to find consensus to work on something. And I think that again ties into our close relations. We have this reservedness and there's a slight bit of conflict avoidance in us, and I think that comes historically from the point that there's not that many people around. I mean, imagine you're an Icelandic farmer living somewhere in the 17th century or even earlier. You have a couple of neighbors. There's one a few kilometers down the road or down the heath in that way, and another one in that direction. These are the only people close by, the people you depend on if you need support or help for something. So you do everything in your power to keep them friendly. So we tend to try to lower tension, avoid conflicts, because the few people around we want to keep good relations with. While I've already said that Icelanders are socially participatory, they like to have consensus, they like to work together, I think we like to defend our social structure, we are still fiercely individualistic. Not in the, I'm sorry if I'm bashing on the Americans here, but not in the aggressively competitive US way of individualism, but more framed in terms of the ability to stand on your own feet, self-reliance, and responsibility for your own actions. But this does also come with the social perspective that you as an individual are allowed to have creative freedom. We value creativity and personal paths quite a lot. So society expects and accepts that a person tries to plow their own path, find their own way in life, and we don't pressure people to fall into one mold. Maybe that's again something we need to do due to our reduced scale. Back in the day specifically, I mean, we're still only 400,000, which is just a size of a city somewhere else, small city. We needed people to be multidisciplinary, to have all kinds of talents, to figure out new ways of doing things. We didn't have people in every single specialized role that could just focus on one role only. So we allow people to experiment, and you can see this in our social fabric, our kind of Nordic system, which promotes, I say, freedom, experimentation, because our social network catches you when you fail. So we try to allow people to go out there, be individualistic, be entrepreneurial, do experience things, but don't just laugh at them and allow them to hit rock bottom if it fails. We value that experimentation, and we say we're going to create a soft landing for you when something fails. Now, this individualism also creates and it ties into what I'm going to mention a little bit later about the egalitarian nature of society here, is that we tend to view each other as equals. We are all just people on our different paths. And this, if I look back to it was an interesting thing here, because these things are changing slightly, and I'll also touch on that a little bit later. But if I look back to the late 90s, early 2000s, before the Icelandic tourism boom and before Iceland became as obvious on the kind of cultural radar of the globe, if I can phrase it like that, we had quite a few kind of world stage celebrities, actors, musicians, these kind of people who came here to Iceland frequently, who even had houses or places in Reykjavik and other parts of the country, and they mentioned that they liked to come over here because they weren't constantly pestered in the street by people for autographs. I mean, nobody took selfies back then, for autographs, even if they were recognized. I think somebody mentioned, I think it was Damon Albarn, the frontman of Blur back in the day. I think he said that everybody in Iceland thinks they're a rock star, and we don't. But it's that individualistic approach, saying that person is no more valuable than me. And also, why should I not respect their privacy and their time? Allow them to be themselves, and I'm going to be myself, equally important here, sitting in the next seat, and I don't feel I need to pester that guy. This is changing. Iceland is a volatile place, and yeah, I think I mentioned it in the beginning. This is the problem with not running on a script. I think I mentioned in the beginning that we have a closeness and a relationship with nature. There are other countries in what you would traditionally call the less developed world. I hate that term, but there are other countries which have a much better relationship with nature. But here it still really affects our way of thinking and our way of approach to life. And we are pragmatic and flexible. Adaptability is very important here. When I've talked to colleagues and friends from continental Europe in the past about the cultural difference between Iceland and there, usually, is that I tend to do the comparison of the fishermen versus the farmers. In many of the European countries and societies, you have people that kind of grew from farming or agricultural backgrounds. Agriculture means long-term planning, right? So you're going to sow these crops this year and those the next year, and you have kind of a long-term plan of how you're going to approach things. This is not the case in Iceland. We were our ancestors, and we came from fishermen, pretty much. When you're fishing in a place like Iceland, you're not making any long-term plans. You wake up in the morning, you look out the window, and you see, oh, the weather is good today. I'm gonna go out, row my boat out onto the ocean and do some fishing. If the weather is bad, that's gonna have to happen later. So we don't traditionally do this long-term planning, but we are pretty good at adapting to and dealing with current situations and changes. And this has, again, pros and cons. I think people will find that we have high resiliency and the ability to kind of just huddle together and cope with times of crises. And you could see that in COVID, for instance. I think we dealt with that quite well. Everybody kind of came together, participated, let's solve this problem together. But on the flip side, we lack the long-term strategic planning that's sometimes needed to run a village that wants to become a proper country or a proper nation state. Social equality, it's not just a tagline or something we pretend to have here. I'm quite proud of this. Being very nationalistically proud of something is not really in my bones or DNA, but this is something that I'm proud of in the society here. we are a very egalitarian society. Social equality means something, is important to us, ties into the supported individualism that I mentioned before. So we do respect different individuals, allowing them to take different paths, understanding they bring different values back into society. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about gender equality, LGBTQ plus equality, religious equality. I don't know. I think we are pretty much at the forefront of that in the world, and this is a tolerant, acceptant society that values these different and values people from these different groups, and honestly doesn't just push them into those groups. We're all just people participating, living, working, hopefully progressing together. And with this egalitarianism comes an intolerance for overt status signaling. We don't like people proclaiming their victories or winning or showing excessive or signs of excessive wealth or these kind of things. That's seen as being vulgar and inappropriate here. So we expect people to kind of understand that we have a role in society and respect the equalness of everybody. That comes with a downside and has a kind of almost a sarcastic flip side to it, because we tend to fall into a herd mentality way of approaching things as well. A new fad which kicks in Iceland is going to be adapted and picked up by almost everybody. If a new vase or a piece of I don't know, style of furniture becomes popular, it's going to pop up in every other household all over the place, because even with what I mentioned before, lack of or low level of competition, there is this comparison happening still. So people are still kind of comparing themselves a little bit with their neighbors. They know they shouldn't be doing that, but nobody wants to be. We want to be equal, which means nobody wants to be lesser than, right? Our communication style is direct and blunt. Not necessarily aggressive or anything like that, but we say what we actually mean. This can come off as impolite to some other cultures. We understand that. We lack the kind of indirect softness of many of the Asian cultures. We don't have the theater around how you have conversations in the UK, that politeness theater, for instance. We don't have these levels of etiquette. We say what we actually want to say. This means also if I tell you I'll call you tomorrow, or let's have a coffee, I mean to call you tomorrow, or I actually want to have a coffee with you somewhere down the road. I'm not just saying that as a part of some social performance. Historically, we've also leaned quite heavily towards freedom of speech. We don't embrace the offense culture as strongly as many of the other countries in the West do nowadays. It's still, hopefully, will remain that way, still understood here that everybody has a right to their opinion, to express their opinion. We don't need to agree with their opinions, and we can argue those opinions. There's a difference between the person and the opinion, and offense is taken rather than given. So if I say something genuinely, and I'm not just trying to rile you up, if I just have an opinion and I express that, and that offends you, that's more on you than on me. This is, again, global influences are having an effect on this, which I really hope we can stave off. When it comes to these things, again, because we are direct, blunt, we look more for the content and the meaning rather than the wrappings around what's being said. So it's more important what you mean than how you actually express that. So you will see people using curse words here quite a lot, and generally as a society we don't care that much. And I think we have a very low tolerance for what we perceive as hypocrisy around what you're saying and how you're saying it. So something like the concept of an F word is actually ridiculous here. The word is not a problem, it's what you're saying. In some other cultures, it's absolutely fine that you tear someone down, you pummel someone verbally, as long as you're using polite words. We're the other way around. it's more important how you treat people than what words you actually use. This bluntness is also apparent in our sense of humor, which is dry, deadpan, ironic, and dark. Very, very dark. While direct and blunt, we can also be emotionally reserved, which means we may not be chatty, we may not be offering up opinions if there's no need to do so. So the directness is how we speak once we get to the decision of wanting or needing to say something. But you're not going to see the same level of bluntness that you see in the Dutch, for instance, who kind of seem to blurt out every opinion they have quite directly at anyone. We kind of keep these things back, but speak honestly when it comes time to speak. And this ties into our social structure as well. I mean, we are if I look at the kind of Icelanders who've lived here for generations and generations, or come from families who've been here for generations and generations, I mean, thankfully our society is changing a little bit, and we're getting beautiful influences in from other parts of the world, which are enriching our social dynamic. But that, again, that traditional sense of Icelandic culture is very clan-oriented. I mean, go back to the 11th and 12th, the 12th and 13th centuries, and we had these blood feuds between Viking clans back in the day. So we are extremely inner circle oriented. That can make us look quite, and we are, I'm not saying it's just a perception issue, we can be a little bit cold or reserved towards outsiders, people we don't know, hopefully polite and all these things, but we have a barrier. We don't let everybody in. Iceland is not about wide networking and creating these networking connections. It's about building close inner circles, whether those are family, friends, something else. People or adults in Iceland have usually kind of built their own bubble of long-term, deep relationships. And once you're inside the wall of these relationships, you kind of get to a deeper emotional level where, you know, there's no superficiality, I think, in general in our social conversation, but that's where you get to the deeper meaning, deeper connection, and it's all about this kind of calm, long-term loyalty within social groups rather than superficial social networking structures. Now, in conclusion, some of these things are changing. It's natural and good for a culture to evolve over time and change, but I think we're seeing, and this is just my perspective, I mean, like all of this stuff, it's just my perspective, but we're seeing change at a pace which is too rapid. I think it's social media, it's the constant connectedness. You see the younger generation now, and this is again a middle-aged man complaining about the younger generation. And it's not the younger generation's fault, it's the environment they live in. Kids nowadays, and I think we could see this happening almost like a bang moment during COVID and closures and isolation and all these things, that connections got wider, or kind of the connections you had with your local society or local environment were severed, so people reached out online. So you're seeing the younger people today a lot more influenced by external trends, by global social norms and expectations than you have the older generation. So offense culture, cancel culture, I mean, that has a place when, you know, but overt offense culture, the tendency to look at headlines and not dive deep into a topic, doing things like chasing around celebrities, asking for selfies, all these kind of things which are really un-Icelandic. You're seeing them really pop up in the, let's say, 15 to 30-year-olds today. And I blame COVID, and I blame that severance that they've had with their elders, with the rest of traditional society. Because like in most other things, I think value lies in the golden middle ground, in moderation. I think having a strong sense of your roots and where you come from and the values of the past, which are the values that have been passed down and filtered through generations and generations. So they have some value to them. They have some what's the term I'm looking for? Anyway, these values which have stood the test of time should be balanced with new things coming in to create a positively evolving society. So I hope we can retain our past while we participate and move into the future. Well, this was a quick video about the Icelandic mindset. Thanks for those of you who watched. I'll see you in the next one.